Guys, I want to welcome you to another episode of the Advisory Board podcast, where we bring experts in from the franchise community to give us actionable advice so we can build brands that will last. And I've got with me a friend of mine I've known for years now, Christian Pillat. If you don't know him, he's been involved in several different ventures and technology platforms in franchising for years. He's the founder CEO of a platform called Transitiv, which is the franchise industry's kind of it's the go-to solution for collaboration, for peer benchmarking, for analytics of a franchise system that it empowers the users, the operators, to be able to evaluate how they're doing against their peers, how they're doing against expected norms, benchmarking, and start to have a clear vision of where they should be, where they can go. It's pretty powerful. I'll let you explain more about that, Christian, but you also need to know that Christian's not just a guy who's been in the back end building tech. He's also been a multi-unit franchise owner, an operator. We were just chatting about that. He's a dad. He's also a pickleball enthusiast. So, Christian, why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself? Tell us a little bit about Transitiv, and then we'll jump into our topic today.
Dave, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here and appreciate the opportunity to be on the show. So, a little about me. I've been in the franchise world effectively my whole professional career. I've been a multi-unit franchise owner, owned 4 different franchise brands, 20 or so territories of those brands.
Mm-hmm.
Also started and been on the founding teams of a few different marketing technologies and local listing technologies for the franchise space. And then most recently with Transitiv, we built a collaborative intelligence tool. Really, we bring together all the data in a franchise system. We've created what's called a common data model, normalize it so that each franchisee is looking at normalized data. And then we share, like you said, peer benchmarking and data across all of the franchise locations to help the franchisees understand what's good, how they're performing, and how they can improve.
Yeah. I love it. Well, and guys, since you'll now know, because I'm going to tell you the topic today, we're going to dive into why I wanted Christian here. We're going to talk about how data is going to either make or break your franchise. And Christian, just to kick it off, you've got a really unique perspective where you were on founding teams of these listing platforms, which are big data model platforms as well, but not maybe with the analytics that you guys have built at Transitiv, right? But how have the needs in franchising changed in the last 3 to 5 years? Because you've been right at the bleeding edge of that.
Yeah, it's really around what's possible. So a lot more is possible with technology now. Fundamentally, though, I don't think that the needs of franchises have changed. So if you look at the franchise business model, people buy into a franchise to be in business for themselves, but not by themselves. Everyone's heard that phrase. And in most cases, people go from anywhere to 2 days to 2 weeks of training.
Mm-hmm.
They're taught how to run a business, and then they're sent back to wherever they're operating the business.
Mm-hmm.
And they really operate in a silo. And Transitiv's goal is to completely eliminate those silos of individual franchisees and to eliminate data silos as well. So I think the needs of franchising, like franchisees need to create that shared understanding. They need to understand their performance versus others. And they really need that collaboration to live out the purpose of why they bought a franchise, which again was to be a part of a peer network that is constantly improving, and the idea that the collective is better than the individual. And that's really what Transitiv is enabling through our shared data.
No, you're spot on. I mean, I think about so Amy and I are still multi-unit franchise owners, and all the time in our kind of the Monday meetings, I don't get to attend very often, but when we do, very often there's so much anecdotal data sharing, so much, because everyone wants to know what's working. Everybody wants to know what products are being used. Everyone wants to know how people are prospecting and breaking into different verticals, and it's all anecdotal. Somebody's like, here, give me the mic and I'll explain how this is working, rather than having a dashboard that says, this is what's working, right? That's super inefficient.
That's spot on. So we always say that most franchise coaching right now is subjective and anecdotal. Franchise coaches will get on, they'll talk to the franchisee in Utah, and that person, Dave, will say, hey, I'm doing this, this, and this. And Dave, since you're such a great franchisee, I'm going to go tell all of the other franchisee that this guy, Dave, is doing great in Utah, and here's what he does.
Yeah.
Uh, and it's all based on these anecdotes, and um, that's not really a good way to coach, right? So
Right.
like the best way to coach is to illuminate blind spots, figure out where you're performing worst in your franchise versus your peers,
Yeah.
uh, and then come up with actionable ways to improve those metrics. So
Yeah.
it's a lot easier to improve something you're bad at than to improve something you're great at. Like if you're trying to improve something you're great at, you might get a 1%, 2%, 5% lift.
Hmm.
If you're really bad at something, you can make a really marked gain and improve it by 50, 60%. And that's really, really meaningful to the bottom line of franchises.
Oh yeah. Well, especially with limited resources, especially with so many franchises that are being pitched as semi-absentee or absentee opportunities. People they don't have the time that they've set aside to work on these brands and invest. So they really need to know microscope on like where's the problem in the business. And with my 3 hours, what can I move the needle on today? I think about like food analytics. Like the food is such an easy example, but if your cost of labor or cost of food or your waste or any of those things are out of line with norms, like you're going to struggle. But most of
Yep.
them don't, sometimes they don't know, or they know after the fact because the only time they find out is when they've done their manual report at the end of the month. And then they get to find out how I did last month. Like that's useless at that point.
Yeah, I'll give an anecdote, a story about one of our customers. So
Please.
a lot of what we try to do at Transitive is focus on leading indicators.
Hmm.
So business, there are leading indicators and lagging indicators. Leading indicators, oftentimes marketing, closing rates, how you're operationally doing. Lagging indicators being financials, and financials only come out after the month is closed, typically 15 days. So it's always delayed. So again, Transitive focusing on the leading indicators for one of our clients, we track a very simple metric, which is total website sessions. And our client went through a vendor change on their website, and basically within 5 days, their website sessions had tanked. They'd gone down by about 50%.
Oh,
And because we track not just the analytics, but we track how that flows through to leads and how that flows through to sales, we were able to tell them literally right away that they were about to lose 40% of their revenue for the next month if they didn't recover this traffic.
well,
So instead of waiting to get to the end of the month and figuring out, hey, our revenue is way down, what happened? We were able to alert the customer, hey, this is about to happen. They put a strategy in place to fix it, and they were able to recover the revenue within about 3 to 4 weeks. So it all happened before the financials actually came out, and that's the power of what you can do if you're focused on the right things.
yeah. And let's talk about lagging indicators for a minute because it feels like that's still what the industry depends upon most. Like that's what we see a lot. Like
It is.
everyone submit your P&Ls and then we'll analyze that or whatever. Or they plug into P&Ls and then they at the end of the month they run a report and on the 10th of the following month they know what actually happened last month.
Yep.
How can that be so detrimental to business? Like why do people have to kind of graduate out of that mindset, which is still the norm, I would say, in franchising?
It's absolutely the norm. So another major problem we have in franchising is uh, in the FTDs, it always says, hey, it costs $200 to $300,000 to open this franchise, right?
Mhm.
People look at it and they're like, well, I'm good. I can do this for 200,000. And then they come into the franchise underfunded.
Mhm.
Uh,
Yeah.
and it happens over and over and over. And running out of the money is obviously the easiest way to go out of business, right?
Yeah.
So when back to your question, when you're focused on lagging indicators,
Mhm.
uh, you're you're really 45 days late to knowing a cash problem or knowing there's an issue in the business. And a lot of these franchises, since they're so underfunded, they don't really have a lot of leeway uh, on their balance sheet to make mistakes. So I think for the industry as a whole to start getting a little bit closer to the leading indicators and to start focusing on those things and knowing what actually builds the business, uh, it's really a much better way to operate the business, and it's a much better way to coach on the business because 45 days can basically mean lights on or off in terms of cash flow for a lot of these franchisees.
Oh yeah, totally agree. In fact, I see a lot of them that are still grossly underfunded, where they don't have any operating income. They're trying to keep that number as low as, and they're coached to, right? Like there are, I won't name any names, but there are organizations in franchising that are coaching brands to try to inflate their item 19 data and deflate the investment data
Yep.
and also play down how much managerial effort is going to be required to really manage the business. This whole BS about semi-absentee, like every time I see it, I think liar. Like I really would never buy a semi-absentee franchise because they don't exist,
Yep.
honestly, unless the franchise has invested in massive managerial internal resources. That does not exist anywhere. So
Dave, we agree so much on this. What does semi-absentee mean? Does
I
that
mean,
mean
it
five
doesn't.
hours a week, like 10 hours a week? Maybe you have to show up 1 day a week. Like what does it actually mean? It's so it's again very subjective.
Mhm.
And I think in most cases what semi-absentee means is that you're probably working 20 to 40 hours a week on the franchise. You're just not physically doing the job.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with you. Which isn't semi-absentee because that's a full-time
It's not.
responsibility, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it's more of a manager position.
Yeah. And especially early on, like I do believe some of them can become semi-absentee where maybe it's a part-time responsibility, not full-time, but I don't think there's a single one that's a part-time responsibility when you're getting launched for the first, 20 weeks. I don't think that even exists, or I don't think it's very responsible to say that. So, but anyway,
No,
but it comes back to what you're talking about with data. If I want a semi-absentee business, but the fact of the matter is I have to work my guts out to get any data to know what's going to be going on and how I can get to that point. Like there's no data plan there. Like if I had benchmarking and data to show this is where your numbers need to be, so you can get to the point in 90 days to hire a manager to run the business and become like this is where the data becomes back into play, right? And but
absolutely.
yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean the idea of hiring a manager, I do think that makes sense in franchising. Like managers can come in, they can operate these businesses, a lot of service businesses and restaurants. But again, you still have to have the cash flow to be able to do that. And hiring a manager too early can really, really hurt your cash flow and it can hurt growth. From if your initial investment's going towards people instead of towards marketing, can really hurt the growth of the franchise in the first 3, 6, 12 months. Once you've created the cash flow to really sustain the manager and the data points to that, and the data points to a repeatable marketing plan and repeatable things that work for your business, then I do think hiring that manager makes sense. And again, the data will tell, and you can set those goals.
Yeah. Well, when I want to take a step back too, because we're talking about franchise unit operator, which is ultimately the most important thing, right? If we're making them successful, the whole franchise system will be successful, unless you do something super dumb. But um, w- how should franchisors be harvesting this data? Because it's such a rich bed of information. I mean, franchising superpower isn't the model. It's the number of people that are independently operating within the model that's
Yep.
showing you what can actually work well. And it's like this rapid test microcosm if it's used right. But how should franchisors be thinking about and using data at the franchisee level and roll-up reports so that they can coach properly? Because we've only been talking about the one side of it.
Yeah. So it relates a little to the first question you asked too, which is, why is this available now, or what are you able to do now that you weren't able to before? And uh, really, about five years ago, uh, you you started being able to pull data from across a variety of systems, so like a marketing system, vertical CRM system, uh, any sort of point of sale or operating system, and financials, and you can bring that into one place. And enterprises are able to do that really, really easily because enterprises only have one of those systems for that business.
Right.
So enter the franchise business model, you actually have, call it 125 units that each have their own QuickBooks account, each have their own marketing vendors, each have their own vertical CRM system with a few customizations on it.
Right.
And what that results in is different data outputs from each one of those systems,
Mhm.
and a lack of normalization, which for the brand leads to inaccurate analytics or bad analytics because you can't get normalized data from the franchisees. So about 6 years ago, data warehouses became much easier to build. A company called Snowflake, most people have heard of them.
Mhm.
They really popularized it for enterprise. But over the last 5 years, it's become possible to pull and extract this data across smaller businesses like franchisees, uh,
Yeah.
normalize it, and build it into one common data model for the franchisor. And when you do that and you have consistent data across all locations, the franchisor is actually able to coach consistently for the first time because they're looking at the same data, same normalized data, same metrics for each location across marketing, across operations, across finance. And those franchise coaches can really coach based on truths in the business instead of like being subjective or sharing anecdotes like they would previously.
Right.
Uh, so for
Yeah.
us, we really uh, we really think that our data makes a coach's life incredibly easy. Like if you look at our usage, our coaches are in the platform every single day,
Mhm.
uh, and they're active in the platform for about 25 minutes. So we know that they're getting on a coaching call, looking at the data for that specific franchisee, and they're able to share exact numbers and exact metrics with that franchisee and tell them exactly where to improve. And that is again a much more efficient way to coach uh, than what coaches are previously doing.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
another thing that coaches seem to do often is they'll jump into without a tool like Transitiv, they'll jump into 5 or 6 different platforms, pull their own reports, and then they'll try to make sense of those 5 or 6 reports across the different platforms and pull up maybe like 5 Excel sheets and show the franchisee. And that's really just a waste of time and leads to a lot of error.
Yeah. Well, because you didn't hire data analysts to be coaches, right? And also how much time. I always think about the amount of time. So if you've got 5 coaches in your organization full time, and they have to do that one task across
Yep.
5 platforms, 4 times a day to have an effective coaching regimen, and it takes them an hour to get all that data together and then try to interpret it well enough that they can have a meaningful conversation with someone who probably knows more about business than they do. You've
Yeah.
created a massive problem for yourself.
Absolutely. And each coach is going to interpret the data slightly differently. And I mean, there's another issue with coaching, which is franchisees almost never trust the corporate office or the franchisor.
Mhm.
Uh, Franchisees want to hear from other franchisees, and they tend to believe things that other franchisees say. Whereas if it comes from corporate, they're thinking, "Hey, this is just another way that corporate's trying to like get another dollar out of me somehow." Uh, so I think as a platform, enabling the ability to allow franchisees to communicate and share
Mhm.
which uh, coach based on ideas from other franchisees, like bubble up the ideas from franchisees and coach based on those. That tends to build trust within the network. Transparency builds trust within the network, and uh, coaching only works if there's a level of trust. And again, that's what data and analytics can do for a franchise.
Yeah, we should go into that a little bit more. So this idea of peer-to-peer sharing, I know I think it kind of freaks out some franchise brands because it represents a lack of control, maybe. But
Yep.
how have you seen this whole idea of like peers, like franchise operators having access to look at peer-to-peer data and then being able to drive their own conversations and get their own help or generate their own resources to support the franchise system without the franchisor needing to invest time and effort to do the same thing? How have you seen that work and play out?
Yeah. Well, we believe in the ability to moderate. So
Uh-huh.
there's always some moderation. I mean, franchises are oftentimes skeptical of doing it or cautious about doing it because they don't want one upset franchisee to ruin it for the whole system or to post things. But what what tends to happen when you launch with a community tool or launch with collaborative tools,
Mhm.
uh, franchisees really come together, and we always set rules that, hey, this is for positive collaboration, this is to improve our businesses, this is the intent of the platform, and we'll if you can't be positive and collaborative, then we're gonna have to moderate or uh, moderate some of the content.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
most franchisees understand that it's there to be helpful, and as long as everyone goes in with the vision of, hey, this is why we're doing it, we see really positive results. Um, I think of it like most businesses now use Slack or Microsoft Teams, right?
Mhm.
Uh, Most enterprise businesses. And what would your life look like if you still had to email rather than use a Slack or Microsoft Teams to collaborate or communicate?
Yeah. My
Like,
inbox would be 10 times worse than it already is. That's the first
yeah,
thing. Yeah.
you used to get 100 internal emails a day, and uh, now you've got Slack going all day, but it brings the communication uh, out to the whole company, and
Mhm.
that's effectively what we're doing, except we're curating that conversation around real facts and real data, and that has a really positive output on franchises. I'll give another anecdote. So we
Nice.
launched with a network, and they were concerned about sharing average price data for their services. So one of the main leaderboard metrics we shared was the average price per service at each location. And rather than the franchisees with lower prices being upset or trying to defend why they were pricing lower, uh, those franchisees with lower prices finally saw the data, and they actually just increased their price, which resulted in a 15% revenue increase in that brand. Uh, Even though, and the franchisor had been telling the franchisees to increase price for a long time. So even though the franchisor was saying it, seeing the rest of their community, seeing the data from the rest the community, and then people asking, hey, how did you increase your price, and how did people respond to it?
Mhm.
Hearing the feedback from other franchisees gave the franchisees the confidence to go raise that price.
Yeah.
Uh, and it's one scenario, but it's consistent across almost any metric that our clients communicate on. Uh, it's it's always, hey, this isn't going to work, this isn't going to work, and then it launches, and all of a sudden the franchisees are like, because they all want to optimize their businesses, they all kind of jump in, collaborate together, and they all self-optimize, and it really takes a lot of the coaching that you have to do out of the business.
Yeah. No, you're darn right. I love that part because one thing that doesn't tick people off is objective data, right?
Yep.
And so I talk to people all the time about this. I mean, we're not transitive, but we have some data in our platform that shows kind of normative behavior, right? And so when a coach can look at that and come to an owner and say, Steve, you've been operating, for a year now. This is exciting. Just wanted to share with you. I've noticed that your lead conversion rate from digital inbound into booked appointment is about 20 points lower than the other guys that have been here for a year.
Yep.
And then they say, well, I'm in the Midwest. Yeah, we checked the Midwest also. You're 17 points lower than like
Yeah.
there's no angst here. Is there right? There's no opinion getting in the way. There's no coach is a bad guy in this case. The coach is just saying, hey, I see this. How can I help now? Can I share some best practices? Can I get you on the phone with Jimmy over, he's across the river from you, but same sort of general market. Would it be helpful if he shared with you his best practices? Like that's now a completely objective productive conversation. And to your point earlier about efficiency, that coach didn't have to spend an hour poring over his subjective analysis of 5 different spreadsheets to try to figure out what might be wrong. Or what normally happens, Christian, at least this is what I hear, those coaches are making phone calls to the
Yep.
franchise owner and they're interrogating them for 20 or 30 minutes, which creates angst, trying to find out
Absolutely.
what might be wrong because they have no data.
Absolutely. And I mean, data without context, data is kind of meaningless. So
Mhm.
like
Yeah.
if I tell you, hey, we get 10 leads a month, is that good? Is that bad?
Yeah.
I don't know. But if you say, hey, I get 10 leads a month and every other franchisee only gets 5 leads a month, all of a sudden you're like, hey, I'm actually doing great. so that sharing that context and feedback from other locations is really what helps franchises focus and improve on the things that matter most in the business, and can help franchisees identify where they're struggling, like with closing rate in your example.
Yeah, and you say giving people context around the data. Because I agree, if you don't have context, data points are useless, and it's a form of manipulation. Actually, you see it in the news all the time, uh,
Yep.
which cracks me up. But
A
the
lot around elections.
oh
I'll
my
just say
heavens, yeah,
that.
don't get me started about that. But
Yeah.
the dust has settled, right? And a lot of stuff came out of the blue, like with the labor statistics that were being made up and like produced and sent out to try to increase the consumer confidence index data that was made up and sent out. Like that's crazy talk. That sounds
It's
like it's
wild.
like Russia politics, but we're not going to go down that track. But you
Yep.
mentioned context. How does a franchise brand create more context around their data?
Yeah. Well, I think it's all about benchmarking.
Mhm.
So good question. It's how you tag your locations, it's how you create peer groups, and it's how you normalize the data across locations. So I'll give you some standard examples of what franchise brands do in terms of creating the context, and
Mhm.
then I'll give you some I guess more complex ones as well. So almost every single brand has the ability to break down locations by region, locations by state, locations by DMA or city. Almost every franchise brand also has the ability to break down franchisees by different peer groups, whether those are just like coaching groups,
Mhm.
groups of franchisees that you have one coach versus groups of other franchisees that have another coach. Um, those are all really powerful because you can see, hey, what's the performance of my location versus the average of other locations in the same state?
Mhm.
That's that's nice to see. It's always useful and creates context into how franchisees in your area are performing. I
Yeah.
think the really cool ones that we see, and the ones that are the most meaningful, are ones where you're actually comparing franchisees versus other franchisees based on where they're at in the business. So like
Mhm.
these franchisees have been open for 6 months. This group, how do I compare to other franchisees when they were only 6 months old? So, like the ability to do a look back on all franchises opening and when they opened and where they were at a certain point in their business, and
Mhm.
saying, hey, franchisees after they're open for 6 months do 30,000 a month in revenue. You're doing 35,000 a month in revenue, so you're beating the trajectory, the growth trajectory we're looking for. I think that's a really cool thing that most franchisors should do. They should be documenting all of the data around how franchisees do throughout the first year of opening, and
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
you should be able to track new franchisees and say, hey, are you doing better or worse than this? And a consistent goal or KPI at franchisors should be, how do I improve month number one by 5%? How do I improve month number two by 5%? How do I improve month number three?
Mhm.
And that's a really, really great way to make sure you have less franchises fail. Is by getting them open and started and profitable a lot quicker. So again, creating context, not just with the standard location things, but trying to do it around age or trying to do it around potentially like different product lines is really, really useful.
Mhm. Yeah, I hear you. You know, you mentioned something early on, a great anecdote about having real-time data so you can see leading indicators of what's going to impact top line, bottom line results. I just want to say, you know, the idea behind this podcast was how do we like how can data make or break a franchise? We've been talking about how it can fix a lot of the problems that are in franchises, right? How it can create scale,
Yep.
it can reduce friction in coaching, how it can give franchise owners and operators the visibility into how they can fix their own business and get themselves on track versus these normative peer groups that you talked about. And yet I keep thinking about the fact that there are so few franchise brands that have real-time analytics and dashboards and data of leading indicators rather than lagging indicators. What's the impact, honestly? So you shared a good impact, but where would you say if you flip the script, what are most franchise brands struggling with today because they don't have that?
It's a good question. Uh, we've rolled out probably with over 30, 40 different franchise brands on this product.
Mhm.
And it's almost like none of them have discovered the same issue. Every single one has discovered one to two, like two or three issues that they want to focus on. Uh, but it's almost like when we roll out for the first time ever, they're getting a clear picture of where they're at. And it's like, oh man, this thing I thought that like we did really great at actually isn't so good. It's actually something that we're probably struggling with and need to improve. Um, I think a lot of a lot of franchises, just to categorize some stuff, I think a lot of franchises don't uh, understand how marketing impacts sales, and they should.
Hmm.
Uh, like a lot of people understand how many clicks or impressions they get, but what does that actually mean? Like they understand that they get a certain number of website visitors, but what does it actually mean in terms of sales to a franchisee?
Hmm.
Uh, Not all traffic's created equal. Like traffic from organic Google searches is always going to be better than links from social media ads. Like those are always going to convert less.
Yeah.
But I think brands could do a much better job of relating how marketing impacts actual sales and how those sales impact the bottom line. And one of the things we recommend doing is focusing on really three metrics. We focus on three metrics and then a subset of drill down metrics.
Hmm.
Uh, by focusing on a lot less and focusing on leading indicators, we help brands uh, narrow their focus on the things that are most meaningful,
Hmm.
and we try to eliminate the noise of having 50 or 100 metrics in a dashboard and really not being able to get anything out of it. Um,
So,
when
and
you
what are they, man? Like now you've got me leaning in a little bit. What do you find are the key metrics that most people need to focus on?
Yeah, so my favorites to look at are website sessions to new customers or sales,
Hmm.
and then to reviews. And if you can track the build of a business from how many new people am I getting or how many people are looking at me,
Hmm.
uh, what is that turning into in terms of new customers or revenue? And then how are those customers actually rating my service? You can get a pretty straight line of the build of that business, and you can do it without the P&Ls. And then if any of those numbers is fluctuating greatly, you can drill in and see really the metrics that build into those metrics.
Hmm. That's pretty cool. Those seem a lot higher level than I was expecting, but I see your point. That's the ratio of one to the other. So website sessions to new sales, and then the website session to reviews or sales to reviews. How do you slash that one up?
Well, it's really review ratings that you're looking at and the sentiment of reviews on the back end.
Got it.
So how you can tell a lot about a franchisee and how that franchisee is trending just from what people are saying online.
Yeah.
Like brand, I know there are a bunch of review platforms out there, but brands can do a really great job of identifying issues uh, based on bad reviews, especially if you're seeing a trend.
Hmm.
And I think brands should do a better job of getting those reviews to coaches because most times it's just in the marketing department and the marketing department's trying to respond to and fix the bad reviews. But really, it's a coaching problem and a coaching opportunity when you start to see a location trending with bad reviews. And it usually leads to an impact on revenue pretty soon thereafter.
Oh yeah, market validation is key. That's like 90% or so now what everyone goes to look at reviews before they buy anything, pretty much now.
Yep.
Even consumer products on Amazon. So I think one reason why Amazon became such a trusted platform is it was infused into their consumer purchase process. And I mean, I won't even bother looking at a product that's not at least a 4.4 on Amazon. If it's not that good, then I'm not going to buy it. And same with
Yeah.
restaurants, 4.5 or above. That's my filter every time. So
Oh, really?
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean I tend to agree with you, especially online. Unless something's like incredibly uh incredibly sparsely reviewed, so like there are only five reviews.
Mhm.
Uh I might take a chance on something, but
Yeah, that's fair.
other than that, I think you're right. I'd probably go four and up.
Yeah. I mean, and Google's analytics are all four and up, right? If someone
Yep.
searches, best, flooring contractor in Salem, Utah, then only 4.0 or above will be shown. But if they're, but it's going to be stack ranked in terms of volume and quality of the reviews
Yep.
and the actual score. That's how they stack rank who they put in front of you above the paid ones.
Yep.
So it's a pretty straightforward game, but you're right, spot on, man. Those reviews, monitoring sentiment, we can start to see customers being like, yeah, it was okay, where they were screaming about how good it was, and now it's flattening. And then that's an indication of the downward cycle that's coming, right?
Yeah, that's exactly it. Like you might get a 4-star review, but in the review they say, I've eaten here for many, many years. It's always been great, but I'm giving it a 4-star review because I've had one or two like bad experiences.
Hmm.
And like you start to read that sentiment over and over, it's really just a great way to, again, we're trying to focus on leading indicators, right? It's a great way to stop a potential trend before it happens. And it's an easy thing to look at that I think a lot of people give to the marketing department when in reality it should be an operations and a coaching, really a coaching platform.
Yeah, yeah, totally agree with you. Man, well, this has been great. I think we've covered quite a few high level ideas, but adding context to data, giving peer-to-peer access so they can collaborate without having to invest the resources and time to get in the middle of it as a franchisor. Obviously, with some moderation, using franchisee data to grow the brand performance, creating those groups, I think is brilliant because truly it doesn't really matter. We did a podcast not long ago with Paul Ebert, the president of Two Maids, and they talked about how they completely restructured their franchise coaching group around those stages, life cycle stages, rather than just like regions, which I think is such a mistake when people do it by region. But small brands, they don't have a choice. But anyway, and I think that you talked about how important that is, though, very well, and also just getting away from subjective analysis of individuals and not wasting that human capital on analysis by putting a tool in place so they can see
Yeah.
objective data. I think it's brilliant. What would you add to
Yeah.
that, Christian?
It's for me as a former franchisee, all I looked for, and this is subjective, but all I wanted was a consistent coaching experience.
Mhm.
So I wanted to know how I related to other franchisees. I also wanted to understand why like a marketing person would tell me one thing and an ops coach would tell me another thing.
Yeah.
So I think bringing all of the data together, marketing and operational data into the same platform, allowing coaches and marketing managers to coach through the same platform, you really get a clear, like singular picture of your business. And businesses that collaborate, a McKinsey study came out last year, and it was businesses that use collaboration tools are 30% more productive.
Mhm.
And that's really, I think that's what franchising needs is a tool that promotes collaboration, promotes shared data and analytics, and creates trust through transparency. And that's really like the goal of what we're building.
Yeah. Your words create trust through transparency. It's so simple, but there's a lot behind that, and I appreciate those thoughts because really, franchising should be transparent. It's regulated to be transparent, and yet there are ways that it's not. Not intentionally, I think, but just because they don't have the right tools or the right resources in place to create the transparency that I think they want. So these are great ideas, great thoughts, Christian. I appreciate you sharing them today. And let's say somebody listening to this wants to get in touch with you because they said, "Hey, I need some ideas of how I can create that trust through transparency in my business." What's the best way to do that, Christian?
Yeah, please reach out. My email is christian@transitiv.io. You can check us out online at transitiv.io. And you can always find me on LinkedIn as well. I get back to everyone pretty quickly. So Dave, I really appreciate you having me on. Great to see you. Congrats on the motorcycle license. And yeah, and look forward to seeing you at an upcoming conference.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks again, Christian. I appreciate you.
Thanks.